and usually lived in Connecticut. So yes, it really has been a magnet for me.
How much of the primary character is a gentleman who left the big corporate world to start a regional business and get involved in business on a more localized level, raised his family into the teeth of the casino gaming expansion? Is there an element of you in the main character?
Well, after I left Congress, and I did represent Eastern Connecticut in Congress, almost all the towns east of the Connecticut River. And then I left Congress to run for governor. I was unsuccessful in the Watergate year, 1974. I then left politics, and my family, my wife and our 4 children, moved from Vernon, where we had lived for a decade, down to Ledyard before the casinos arrived. And those 2 experiences, knowing the political backdrop of Eastern Connecticut and the entire state, as well as I did, and then living in the midst of this casino gambling explosion, really gave me a front row seat for watching first of all, the political maneuverings that led to the casinos, and then seeing firsthand their impact. So that was, having seen that and lived through it, I thought it was one of the most remarkable stories in the history of New England. The idea of these 2 Indian tribes, which had gradually faded away to the point there was almost no more Indian blood left, almost no more Indian culture left, and yet re-emerging, thanks to the government, thanks to Congress, thanks to the courts, to build the world's 2 biggest casinos in Eastern Connecticut. And I wanted to write that story, and I wanted to write it in a story that I could try to put a human face on what had happened.
Well, the book, like I said, is very accessible. I mean, it gradually introduces a lot of the issues, but does it in a very, again, a very accessible way. In your take, now that we've had a number of years post-casino expansion in Connecticut, what's the single biggest effect that you take away from it? I mean, we are, in a sense, in Newport, looking to create this same issue. What's the biggest impact?
Well, first of all, there certainly was a favorable impact initially. I mean, the casinos created 20,000 casino jobs. They created, they sent hundreds of millions of dollars a year to the state treasury in Hartford. They attracted tens of thousands of people from out of state who, of course, left their money in Connecticut. And what is interesting is state after state, including Rhode Island, looked at these statistics and said, we've got to have that here as well. And I understand that. But the question is, has anybody in Rhode Island looked at what's been happening in Connecticut recently? Has anybody looked at the downside of what has happened in Connecticut? And there's plenty of that. I mean, we've had the casino's presence has created a pervasive gambling culture in southeastern Connecticut. They've sharply skewed our economy toward low-paying service jobs. And they've resulted in a sharp spike in the number of pathological and problem gamblers, which, of course, an enormous number of social problems come with that. The other thing is there was a study done just in 2009. The state of Connecticut did a study, and one of the most fascinating results of that study was the finding that there had been a 400% increase in Connecticut since the casinos opened in the number of arrests for embezzlement, a rate of increase 10 times the national average.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, my tax collector in Ledyard was one of the embezzlers. She stole $302,000 from tax receipts. I never knew whether mine were among them or not, but in order to play the slots at Foxwoods. And, of course, she didn't win because over time, statistically,
the casinos wouldn't stay open if people were winning.
Well, exactly. And
I'm sure she was thinking, well, all I need is one big win and then I can put the money back.
Exactly. And these embezzlements in Connecticut, and it isn't just Connecticut also. I mean, Rhode Island has been heavily impacted by the Connecticut's
because we're right over the border.
Exactly. And these aren't just every once in a while. We just had a major embezzlement up in the town of Winchester, Connecticut, which is up in the northwest corner. So it isn't just in eastern Connecticut. This is 60 miles away from these casinos. Mm-hmm. And there, the chief financial officer, and he just was convicted for it, stole over $2 million in order to play at Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun, among other things. And it actually brought the town of Winchester to its knees. Right up until Christmas, it was talking about having to close the school system because of this enormous embezzlement. So there are so many negative ramifications that nobody ever talks about. All they talk about is the revenue. On the revenue side, we're going to get this much revenue. And that has gotten, and I appreciate the invitation to speak here and your interest in the subject, because Rhode Island is in a particularly bad fix. Rhode Island, as bad off as Connecticut is, Rhode Island gets 4 times as much of its budget, its revenue budget, from gambling than Connecticut does. So here in Connecticut, we're beginning to see the impact now of all the competition. Connecticut's revenue is down 34% in the last 6 years. Layoffs at the casinos have begun. Casinos are increasingly turning to part-time jobs in order to lower overall wage costs and get rid of benefits. And here, we've got Rhode Island, which already depends on gambling revenue, 4 times more dependent as Connecticut is. It now wants to convert, or some of you in Rhode Island want to convert the slots parlor in Newport into a full-scale casino. I just can't imagine what people are thinking here in Rhode Island.
Well, the astonishing part is if you spend time in Newport, you'll realize that Newport is the gem of Rhode Island. It's a successful center of tourism without any of the need to attract people to it for casino gambling. And talk to me about the effect locally, since you've got a presence there, on local businesses when you just drop this casino in like a bomb. What happens to local businesses?
What happens is that the casinos cannibalize local businesses. I'll give you an example. I had a very good friend who was owned one of the most successful restaurants in southeastern Connecticut. And I remember how excited he was when one of the casinos was coming in just 2 miles away. And he thought for sure that with all these people coming over from Providence and coming down from Boston and up from New York, surely hundreds of those people would stop at his restaurant every month to maybe have a drink or to have lunch before they went to gamble or have dinner afterwards. And certainly of these 20,000 employees, some of them would come in after a hard day on the job and want to relax. In any event, it took him about 28 months to close his restaurant. Wow. And I remember what he told me at that time. He said, "You know, Bob," he said, "I can't believe how naive I was about how the casinos work, but now I understand. People drive to the casinos, they play at the casinos, they go to the casino shows, they stay at the casino hotels, they eat at the casino restaurants, and when they're done, they fill up their gas tanks at the casino gas stations and drive home. We, as local merchants, rarely see any of them."
Right.
And yet at the same time, so many of these casinos depend on local revenue, particularly in a case of a depressed economy, to support them. So not only do you have the tourists visiting and not spending any money, you've got money that would have been spent on the local painter, the local deli, the local restaurant, the local whatever. And one of the reasons, Bob, that Rhode Island is in the situation it's in now is because we've got this chronic dependence already. You know, I always joke you can't put a koi pond in your backyard without some type of environmental impact study. Yet we drop these casino bombs just on a whim and a prayer and a hope that let's do a show and everything will work out just fine. Where's the disconnect?
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, the disconnect is the short-term perspective of the people who are in office. They're looking ahead a year or 2 years. They're looking at the revenue. They're not looking at what happens after this revenue starts to decline. And, of course, that's exactly what's happening in Connecticut. And if we have a problem in Connecticut, think of the problem you're going to have here. The budget problems you already have. You were talking about the pension system here and the pension problems. Just think, with you've got 12% of your revenues coming from gambling now. What happens when Massachusetts starts to build these casinos and you begin to lose that revenue? Well, some people are saying, well, what we need is more gambling in order to replace it. But you're in for a true budget crisis as this saturation of casinos continues across the Northeast.
Well, and the interesting part is the first ground has actually been broken on the first, what they're calling track/slot machine parlor / whatever, just literally 7 miles from the Rhode Island border at what is now called Plain Ridge, and which is only, I guess, about a 16-mile drive from Twin River. So it's it's about to happen.
Let me point out one other thing. People always they justify it by saying, "Look, we're getting this much revenue. We can spend some of the revenue on mitigation of the problems. We can spend some of the revenue on something else. It is revenue that allows us not to have to further raise taxes." But in fact, we know it is a tax. It is a regressive tax on people who can afford it the least.
Absolutely.
On low-income people, on minorities, on the elderly, increasingly interestingly on women. Here's a final conclusion.
Hold that thought for just after this break. We want to hear this. This is the home run point. This is the hallelujah moment on what we've been building up for weeks on the Coalition. You're listening to the Coalition on Talk Radio on AM 790, your center for news, business, and sports, and everything that matters.
Attention gardeners, farmers, growers, homesteaders, and horticulturalists. Coming soon to 1889 Post Road in Warwick, Rhode Island, it's The Grow Store. For all your indoor gardening supplies, it's The Grow Store. Mike's Professional Tree Service offers top-of-the-line tree removal, trimming, stump grinding, stump removal, and so much more. Mike's Professional Tree Service will do everything to safeguard your home and property and is fully licensed and insured. Call them today at 401-823-7485 for a free estimate on tree service, tree removal, trimming, and tree care. That's 401-823-7585. Mike's Professional Tree Service are the tree experts serving all of Rhode Island. Online at mikesprotree.com. That's mikesprotree.com. Attention gardeners, farmers, growers, homesteaders, and horticulturalists. Coming soon to 1889 Post Road in Warwick, Rhode Island, it's The Grow Store. For all your indoor gardening supplies, it's The Grow Store. Midday Records is a label that is comprised of local artists and exists for the sole purpose of helping other local artists find new opportunities and to help build a more thriving New England music scene. Midday Records hosts the area's fastest-growing music-related networking event, the Midday Social, books Midday Records presents shows throughout New England, releases compilations featuring local music, promotes bands through the Midday blog, are the co-founders of Music for Pause, and has recently started an artist development and management division. Stay up to date with Midday Records by checking them out on your favorite social media site like Facebook and Twitter, and find them online at middayrecords.com. That's middayrecords.com.
You are listening to the Coalition on Talk Radio, AM 790. We're sitting here with Bob Steele, who is telling about his experience with casino gaming, his book, The Curse. Bob, we were just building up to that, what I call that hallelujah moment, as we enter the show. Right before the break, just explain to us what really happens. Is this really nothing more than a tax?
Well, the final analysis, it is a tax, because what the states do, the states look at the casinos as an opportunity to share in the income so that they don't have to take the politically unpopular step of, one, controlling spending, two, actually imposing additional taxes. And so they've got people believing that somehow this is a free ride. And it's not a free ride, because we know that the long-term cost of these casinos is actually greater than any short-term benefit that you get. For example, what I was going to mention was there's a brand new study out. It is a extremely important study done by the American Institute for the Institute for American Values. It's a think tank in New York. It's nonpartisan. It's nonprofit, etc. They came out with a study last fall looking at the impact of casinos on America, and I just want to read you their conclusion. There's so much to this study. There's so much meat in this study that I wish every politician who's about to vote for a casino could read it. But in any event, here's the conclusion. In sum, according to this study, the long-term costs of the new